The story of the Perseverance Mars rover does not begin on Mars. It begins many years earlier on Earth, in quiet offices, busy laboratories, and long meetings filled with ideas, questions, and dreams. Long before the rover touched the Martian surface, thousands of people had already spent countless days shaping its purpose. Scientists, engineers, designers, and researchers all came together with one shared goal: to answer one of the biggest questions in human history: did Mars ever support life? For decades, Mars has captured the imagination of humanity. It is the planet that lies close to Earth, the planet that once had rivers, lakes, and maybe even oceans. Mars looks empty and silent today, but long ago, it may have been completely different. Many scientists believe that billions of years ago, Mars was warm and wet, with environments where tiny forms of life might have lived. But no one could prove this. No one had the final evidence, and this mystery pushed the dream of the Perseverance rover forward. NASA mission planners knew that to answer this question, they needed more than simple photos. They needed a powerful machine, a robot that could act like a mobile laboratory on another planet. A rover strong enough to travel across dangerous terrain, smart enough to study rocks and soil on its own, and advanced enough to gather samples for a future mission to bring back to Earth. This dream slowly started to take shape in the minds of scientists, and over time, this dream turned into a design. The design became a blueprint, and the blueprint became a real machine, Perseverance. From the very beginning, Perseverance was planned to be the most advanced rover ever sent to Mars. It would carry new instruments, new sensors, and even a small helicopter, the first aircraft designed to fly on another world. But before any of this could happen, the team had to choose a landing site. They needed to find the perfect place on Mars to search for ancient life. Many scientists debated this decision for years. Different locations were studied: old river deltas, ancient lakebeds, and mysterious valleys. But one place stood out from all the others: Jezero Crater. Jezero Crater was once a lake billions of years ago. At its edge, there is a large river delta, a place where sediment collected for a very long time. On Earth, deltas are full of clues about the past, including signs of life. If Mars ever had tiny microbes, Jezero Crater was an ideal place to find evidence. So the choice was clear. Perseverance would travel to Jezero Crater and begin the most important search ever made on Mars. Once the landing site was chosen, the next challenge began. Engineers needed to build a rover unlike anything before it. Perseverance had to survive a long journey through space, land safely on a dangerous planet, and then work for years in freezing, dusty conditions. Every part of the rover had to be tested and proven. Failure was not an option, not after so many years of planning and hope. Inside NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or JPL, the work began. Technicians in clean white suits entered large assembly rooms. The air was filtered, the floors were spotless, and every tool was cleaned again and again. Dust could not be allowed near the rover. If a single grain of Earth dust traveled to Mars, it could contaminate the samples, so the environment had to remain perfect. Piece by piece, Perseverance started to come alive. First came the strong wheels designed to survive sharp rocks and steep slopes. Then came the robotic arm, long and flexible, holding powerful tools and drills. Cameras were added, not just one or two, but more than 20, each specially designed to give scientists a clear view of Mars. Next came the spectrometers, sensors, and instruments that could study minerals, measure chemicals, and even search for organic molecules. These were the tools that could help reveal whether Mars once hosted life. One of the most impressive parts of the rover was its sample collection system. Perseverance was built to drill into Martian rocks and store samples inside small tubes. These tubes were made with extreme care, cleaned to the highest possible level, and sealed tightly. The goal was for a future mission to pick up those tubes and bring them back to Earth. For the first time in history, humanity planned to return material from another planet. But Perseverance's creators did not stop there. They wanted to try something bold, something never attempted before. They wanted to put a helicopter on Mars. This small aircraft, named Ingenuity, would fly in the thin Martian air. It would scout future paths for the rover and show that powered flight was possible on another world. Many people doubted it would work. Mars's atmosphere is less than 1% the density of Earth's. Flying there seemed almost impossible, but NASA team believed in the vision. They built a lightweight helicopter with spinning blades that moved incredibly fast. They tested it again and again, simulating the conditions of Mars inside special chambers. Slowly, confidence grew. And finally, Ingenuity was attached to the belly of Perseverance, ready to begin its adventure. But even with all of this progress, many challenges remained. The rover had to survive the launch from Earth, the long journey through space, and the landing on Mars. The team called the landing sequence the 7 minutes of terror, because once the rover entered the Martian atmosphere, no one on Earth could help it. The communication delay was too long. The rover had to land itself fully autonomous, fully alone, and before those 7 minutes could arrive, Perseverance had to be perfect. The rover went through inspection after inspection. Every bolt was checked, every wire was tested, every computer was examined. Engineers treated Perseverance like a living creature, listening for any sign of weakness, any tiny sound that might signal a problem. Months passed, then years. Slowly, confidence grew. Perseverance was ready. One of the most emotional moments came when the rover rolled into the cleanroom for final assembly. Many engineers who had worked on Mars missions before felt the same feeling again, a mixture of pride, fear, hope, and excitement. They knew that machines like Perseverance represent humanity's greatest dreams. Machines like Perseverance show what humans can achieve when they push beyond limits. At last, the rover was complete. Strong wheels, a powerful arm, advanced scientific tools, and a tiny helicopter. It was a masterpiece of human engineering. But soon, it would leave Earth forever. The day finally came when Perseverance was packed into its protective shell. This shell would guard the rover from the heat of launch and the vacuum of space. As the protective shields closed around it, many of the engineers stepped back silently. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled proudly. Some whispered quiet words of encouragement even though the rover could not hear them. But everyone felt the same thing: the mission was now real. Outside at the launch pad, the rocket stood tall. It reached into the sky, shining in the sunlight, filled with fuel and fire. This rocket would carry Perseverance into space. It was powerful, dangerous, and magnificent. Workers made final checks and then cleared the area. Everything was ready. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, everyone watching held their breath. If anything went wrong now, years of hard work could be lost. 3, 2, 1, the engines ignited. Fire exploded beneath the rocket. Smoke filled the air. And slowly at first, then faster and faster, the rocket lifted off the ground. Perseverance was leaving Earth. The rover's journey had begun. Inside Mission Control, the team watched the rocket climb into the sky. Cheers and applause filled the room as the rocket disappeared into the clouds. But even in that moment of celebration, everyone knew that this was only the beginning. The most dangerous part, the landing, still lay ahead. The rover still had to travel millions of kilometers through space, survive intense heat, and guide itself safely onto the surface of Mars. But for now, the only feeling in the room was pride. Perseverance was no longer just a plan. It was no longer just a machine built inside a laboratory. It was a traveler heading toward another world. And as the rocket carried the rover higher and higher, crossing through the atmosphere and into the blackness of space, the narrator's voice would remind the audience, this is not just a mission. This is humanity reaching out into the unknown. Perseverance was on its way. When Perseverance finally left Earth and the rocket disappeared into the vast sky, many people watching on screens around the world felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. The rover was now far from home, far from every hand that built it, far from the only world it had ever known. It was now a small machine traveling alone in the endless darkness of space. For most people, space looks empty. But the narrator explains that space is not empty at all. It is full of dangers. Radiation, dust, sharp temperature changes, and the total silence that stretches forever. A tiny mistake, a small malfunction, or even a small piece of space debris could destroy everything. But Perseverance was prepared. It carried strong shields, powerful computers, and a precise navigation system. Everything had been designed to guide it safely through this long journey. As soon as the rover separated from the rocket and entered deep space, it unfolded its antennas and solar sensors. The first signal it sent back to Earth was short but powerful, a simple message that told everyone, I am alive, I am safe. Inside the Mission Control building, cheers again filled the air. But after the celebration, scientists and engineers knew the real work had just begun. For the next 7 months, they would monitor every detail of the spacecraft's health. They watched its temperature, power levels, fuel supply, and orientation in space. They kept track of every vibration, every tiny adjustment, every change in communication. They were not just watching a machine, they were guiding a traveler. The spacecraft that carried Perseverance was shaped like a protective cocoon. Inside it, the rover rested safely, sleeping most of the time while its systems ran silent checks. Every few days, the rover woke up to check its equipment. It ran tests, measured its surroundings, and made sure nothing was failing. After each test, it sent information back to Earth, and then returned to a quiet, energy-saving mode. During these months, Earth and Mars continued moving in their orbits around the Sun. Sometimes they moved closer, and sometimes farther away. Because of this, signals between the rover and Earth took longer and longer to travel. A message that took only a few minutes early in the mission started taking 15 or 20 minutes later. Every command had to be timed carefully. The narrator explains that deep space navigation is like steering a ship across a dark ocean with no lights. The spacecraft used small thrusters to adjust its position. Even the smallest mistake in direction, even a fraction of a degree, could send the rover thousands of kilometers off course. The journey was long and difficult, filled with tiny corrections. Each time the spacecraft received a correction command, the thrusters fired for only a few seconds, but those few seconds could change everything. As Perseverance traveled farther from Earth, the blue planet slowly became a small dot behind it. The sun remained bright, but the stars grew sharper and clearer. The spacecraft passed near asteroids, dust clouds, and unseen dangers, but it continued straight, following a path carefully calculated by the navigation team. The rover also faced extreme temperatures. When sunlight hit the spacecraft, parts of it heated up rapidly. When it turned away, temperatures dropped to freezing. These changes could damage metal, strain wires, and affect the internal systems. But the spacecraft's thermal control kept everything stable. Heaters switched on and off at the right moments, preventing the rover from freezing in the darkness of space. The narrator describes how strange the journey felt for the team on Earth. Some days were silent and routine. Other days were full of problems. One of the first concerns came when engineers saw a small sensor behaving strangely. It showed a temperature reading that didn't make sense. Panic rose in the room. Was something overheating? Was a component failing? But after hours of checking, the team realized it was only a minor glitch, not a real danger. Perseverance remained safe. Weeks passed, then months. The rover traveled more than 450 million kilometers, far from home. It became a silent traveler surrounded by stars and darkness. At one point, the spacecraft entered a region full of high-energy particles that could damage electronics. But the rover's radiation shielding worked perfectly. The danger passed. Meanwhile, on Earth, scientists used the time to prepare for the landing. They ran simulations again and again. They studied new data from Mars to understand winds, dust storms, and the exact shape of the landing zone. Every day, mission planners asked the same question: will Perseverance survive the landing? Back in space, the rover continued its lonely voyage. Sometimes it turned slowly to adjust its solar angle. Sometimes it rolled to keep itself warm. And sometimes it remained completely still, floating through silent space like a drifting ship. The narrator explains that many people imagine space travel as fast and dramatic, but in truth, it is often slow and quiet. A journey across millions of kilometers moves with patience. Small steps, small changes, and careful planning define the mission. But silence can be deceiving, because as Perseverance came closer to Mars, the real danger began to grow. Mars is a beautiful planet, but it is also a deadly one. The atmosphere is thin, filled with dust, and unpredictable. Weather can change in minutes. Dust storms large enough to cover the entire planet can rise without warning. Temperatures can suddenly drop by 60 degrees, and the surface is covered with rocks, cliffs, craters, and ancient river paths that make landing nearly impossible. As the rover approached Mars, the spacecraft turned to face the planet. For the first time, Perseverance saw its destination, a small reddish world glowing under the sunlight, covered in swirling clouds of dust. This was the place where it would attempt its most dangerous maneuver. On Earth, the mission control team grew tense. Each day they checked the landing system, the parachutes, the thrusters, the radar, the sky crane, and the rover's programming. Everything had to work perfectly during the 7 minutes of terror. But before landing, the spacecraft needed one final adjustment, a major course correction. Without it, Perseverance would miss the landing zone and crash into mountains or rocks. The team prepared the final correction burn. They calculated the angle, the force, and the timing. A single mistake could put the rover hundreds of kilometers off its path. Everyone watched as the countdown for the correction began. 5, 4, 3, the thrusters fired. The spacecraft shook slightly. Telemetry numbers changed rapidly on the screens. Lines of data streamed across monitors at incredible speed. Then silence. For a moment, no one knew if the correction worked. The signal was delayed. The screens showed nothing. Long seconds passed. People in the control room stared at their monitors, waiting, hoping. Finally, data arrived. The correction burn was successful. The spacecraft was now on the perfect path toward Jezero Crater. Relief filled the room, but the narrator reminds the audience, with every kilometer Perseverance traveled, the danger only grew. Mars was now close, too close to turn back, too close to slow down. The spacecraft was heading straight for the planet at nearly 20,000 kilometers per hour. The narrator describes the moment as one of calm before a storm, because ahead lay the atmosphere, ahead lay the fiery entry, ahead lay the parachute explosion, ahead lay the sky crane descent, ahead lay the final seconds that would decide everything. and as Perseverance approached the red world traveling faster than a bullet, the spacecraft received its final command from Earth: prepare for entry, begin landing sequence. The rover was now on its own. The world watched, the team held their breath, and the red planet waited below. As Perseverance approached Mars, the spacecraft carrying the rover prepared for the most dangerous moment of the entire mission. For 7 months, the rover had traveled through the silent darkness of space. It had passed dust clouds, radiation, and extreme temperatures. It had survived everything so far, but now was about to face something far more deadly: the atmosphere of Mars. The narrator explains that Mars' atmosphere is very thin, only 1% as thick as Earth's. But even this thin layer of air can create intense heat when a spacecraft enters at high speed. Perseverance was traveling at nearly 20,000 kilometers per hour. When it hit the atmosphere, the friction would create a storm of fire around it. Scientists call this moment the entry, descent, and landing, but most people know it by its more dramatic name, the 7 minutes of terror. Inside Mission Control, the team sat silently at their consoles, staring at screens filled with numbers, graphs, and signals. Each person had a role. Some monitored the parachute, some tracked the heat shield, some watched the rover's computer system, and others scanned the landing zone in case something unexpected happened. The room was full of tension, but also full of focus. Everyone knew that once the spacecraft entered the atmosphere, no human could control it. The distance between Earth and Mars was too great. Signals took more than 11 minutes to travel. By the time Mission Control received a message, the landing would already be over. The rover had to make every decision by itself. It had to react faster than any human could. It had to save itself. The spacecraft rotated to the perfect angle for entry. This angle was extremely important. Too steep and the rover would burn up. Too shallow and it would skip off the atmosphere like a stone on water and fly off into space forever. The angle was checked, corrected, and confirmed. Then the moment arrived. Perseverance hit the atmosphere. A wall of fire exploded around the spacecraft. Temperatures outside rose above 300 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt metal. But the heat shield did its job. Flames licked across the edges, rushing around the structure as the spacecraft slowed from incredible speed. Inside the protective shell, Perseverance felt the shaking. The entire spacecraft vibrated violently. Sensors measured temperature, pressure, and acceleration. The rover's computer adjusted its position to keep the spacecraft stable. Every second, it made thousands of calculations. On Earth, the Mission Control team watched the data appear on their screens. Narrator explains how they looked calm on the outside, but deep down, every heartbeat felt heavy. They could do nothing except wait and believe in their years of hard work. As the spacecraft fell deeper into the atmosphere, the heat slowly decreased. The most dangerous part of entry was over, but the mission was far from safe. The next challenge was even trickier: the parachute. Perseverance needed to slow down from supersonic speed to something manageable before landing. For that, it carried the largest parachute ever sent to another planet. The parachute had to open perfectly at exactly the right moment. Too early and it would rip apart. Too late and the rover would hit the ground too fast. The narrator describes the moment as one of intense anticipation. The spacecraft reached the correct altitude. The computer inside counted down. 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second, boom. The parachute fired out with explosive force. It expanded in the thin Martian air like a giant red and white flower. Instantly, the spacecraft slowed from supersonic speed to something much more controlled. The parachute held strong against the pressure, pulling the rover through the sky. In Mission Control, people leaned forward. The parachute data showed clean and stable readings. The room breathed out in relief, but the parachute could not slow the rover enough for a safe landing. There was still too much speed, and the next danger was coming fast: the separation of the heat shield. The heat shield had protected Perseverance from the fire of entry, but now it needed to fall away so the rover's cameras and landing radar could scan the ground. This was a dangerous moment. If the heat shield failed to separate, the rover would crash. If it came off at the wrong angle, it could strike the rover itself. The computer triggered the command. There was a loud mechanical release. Bolts exploded outward, and the heat shield fell away into the thin Martian atmosphere, spinning toward the ground far below. Sunlight rushed into the spacecraft for the first time. Perseverance's cameras came to life. They stared down at the red planet, cliffs, rocks, dust clouds, and the ancient scars of Mars' turbulent past. This was no ordinary view. This was a view from history. The rover's radar began sending signals downward. It measured altitude, speed, and ground texture. But the narrator explains that Mars is unpredictable. Dust devils can appear suddenly. Wind can shift in seconds. The rover had to stay alert. The parachute slowed the spacecraft further, but the rover was still falling too fast. So the computer made another decision. It cut the parachute. For a moment, the rover fell freely through the Martian sky. The narrator states that this moment is the most terrifying of all. Everything depended on the next system, the descent stage. With a roar of engines, the descent stage fired its thrusters. These rockets were designed to control the final part of the landing. They adjusted direction, slowed the descent, and kept the rover stable. The descent stage pulled Perseverance away from the parachute, guiding it toward the chosen landing zone. But Jezero Crater was full of danger, cliffs, boulders, and sharp rocks. Landing anywhere could be fatal. So Perseverance used a new technology called terrain relative navigation. This system compared the real landscape with maps stored in the rover's computer. In real time, it decided where to land safely. The narrator explains how incredible this technology is. The rover was choosing its own landing site while falling at high speed. The descent stage fired its thrusters again, moving the spacecraft to a safer location. The rover was now only a few hundred meters above the ground. Then the final stage began, the sky crane maneuver. The descent stage lowered Perseverance on long, strong cables. The rover dangled in the air like a giant mechanical child. Engines fired above, dust swirled below, the wheels unfolded, the landing gear locked in place. Meters became centimeters. The wheels touched the Martian surface. Perseverance had landed, but on Earth. Mission Control did not know this yet. The signals were still traveling across space. They waited. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and then the call came through the speakers. Touchdown confirmed. The room exploded in relief. People cried, clapped, hugged, and shouted. They had done the impossible. A rover had landed safely on another world once again. But the narrator reminds the audience landing was only the beginning. Now Perseverance had to wake up, check every system, deploy its instruments, and start exploring one of the most mysterious places in the solar system. And then something unexpected happened. In the first images sent back from the rover, scientists noticed something strange. A shadow, a shape, something on the horizon. It was not a rock, not dust, not a glitch. Mission Control zoomed in, trying to understand what they were looking at. The narrator whispers, what the rover saw on its first day would change the mission in ways no one expected. When Perseverance touched the rocky surface of Jezero Crater, it had already completed the most dangerous part of its mission. The landing was successful, the rover was alive, and the red planet stretched out all around it like a giant open book waiting to be read. But inside Mission Control on Earth, celebration soon turned into silence, because the very first images sent by Perseverance showed something unusual. The rover's cameras scanned the horizon. The ground was a dusty mix of red and brown. Sharp rocks lay scattered across the landscape. Ancient river channels carved into the surface like old scars. Everything looked exactly as scientists expected, except for one thing. In the corner of one image, something formed a shape. A long, thin shadow, stretching across the ground in a direction that didn't match any rock or part of the rover itself. For a moment, Mission Control froze. No one spoke, no one moved, and no one smiled anymore. The narrator explains that shadows on Mars can be tricky. Light behaves differently in the thin atmosphere. Dust can bend sunlight in strange ways. But this shadow, this one, looked different. Longer, sharper, almost deliberate. Scientists zoomed in again and again. The shadow did not disappear. It remained there, clear and dark. But before panic could rise, more images arrived. Slowly, things became less mysterious. The shadow seemed to come from a rock formation shaped in a strange way. The angle of the sunlight made it look longer and more unusual than it really was. Mission Control relaxed. The tension disappeared. And the narrator reminds the audience, on a new world, even a normal rock can feel like a mystery. With the strange shadow mystery solved, Perseverance began its real work. The rover spent its first Martian day, performing health checks. It tested its wheels, its cameras, its robotic arm, its power system, and its computers. Scientists watched the data as if reading the heartbeat of a newborn explorer. Everything looked perfect. The narrator describes how the first images of Mars always feel magical. Perseverance sent high-resolution panoramas showing a world untouched by humans. The sky was soft orange. The horizon curved gently like the edge of a dream. The rocks were rough and ancient, each one holding secrets from a time when Mars may have been alive with water. Perseverance slowly turned its head-shaped camera system, called CosmoCAST, to capture a full 360-degree view. The colors were sharp. The details were crisp. It felt like the rover was standing in the middle of a long-forgotten world. On Earth, scientists studied the pictures carefully. They searched for rocks that came from ancient riverbeds, mineral types that formed in water, and patterns that might show biological processes from billions of years ago. Everything in Jezero Crater was a clue. Every crack, every layer, every shadow had meaning. On the second sol, Perseverance took its first drive. It moved only a few meters, but this moment was historic. The rover's wheels touched Martian soil and left fresh tracks marks that had never existed until Perseverance arrived. The narrator explains that these first tracks meant more than just movement. They symbolized the beginning of humanity's search for ancient life, a search that had taken decades to prepare. As the rover drove, it captured images of the rocks nearby. Some rocks were sharp and pointed. Others were rounded and smooth, shaped long ago by flowing water. There were thin layers in some stones that hinted at slow, calm sedimentation, the kind that could preserve ancient microbial fossils. Perseverance pointed its supercam laser at one promising rock. A small burst of energy struck the surface. A tiny spark flashed. The rover listened to the sound created by the laser. From that sound, scientists could learn the rock's hardness and mineral structure. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for, the first chemical reading. The rover's instruments detected minerals formed in the presence of water. This was a good sign, a very good sign. If ancient life ever existed on Mars, these would be the types of rocks where evidence might still be hiding. While Perseverance examined rocks, something else happened beneath the rover. The helicopter Ingenuity, still attached under the rover's body, woke up for the first time. Ingenuity was small, light, and fragile like a delicate insect built for flight. It checked its solar panel, it tested its battery, it signaled back, systems normal, ready for flight programming. This moment meant the future was near. Soon the first aircraft in history would attempt to fly on another planet, but it needed more preparation. On Sol 4, Perseverance unlatched the protective shield around Ingenuity. On Sol 5, the rover moved to a flat region where the helicopter could be deployed safely. The ground had to be smooth, the slopes gentle, and the rocks small. Perseverance scanned the ground carefully, searching for the perfect landing zone for its tiny companion. Finally, on Sol 6, the rover found the right place. Scientists called it the Wright Brothers Field, honoring the first humans who flew on Earth. Now the rover had two missions: start the scientific search for ancient life, help the helicopter prepare for the first flight. But the narrator explains that everything on Mars requires patience. Every movement is slow, every decision is careful. Mars is dangerous. Mars is unpredictable. While Perseverance waited for Ingenuity to charge, the rover explored the edges of an ancient stream bed. It found unusual rocks, some with holes, some with smooth surfaces, some with strange shapes formed by minerals long gone. One rock in particular caught scientists' attention. It had tiny channels running across it, lines that looked almost like veins. Perseverance used its robotic arm to study it more closely. It scanned the surface with its pixel instrument, measuring microscopic details. It shined ultraviolet light using Sherlock, looking for organic molecules. Hours passed. The rover worked quietly in the freezing Martian weather. The wind brushed soft dust over its tracks. The sun slowly moved across the sky. Finally, the results came in. Scientists stared at the data. Something about the rock seemed unusual, too unusual. It contained mineral patterns that usually form in the presence of stable, long-lasting water. Water that stayed in one place for thousands, maybe millions of years. The kind of environment where tiny microbial life could have existed. The narrator emphasizes this moment. It was not proof of life, but it was a strong step in the right direction. Perseverance stored the information. Then it prepared to take its first sample. The drill lowered. The bit spun. Dust rose slowly into the air. A cylindrical piece of rock broke free and was collected inside a titanium tube, the first sample for a future mission to bring back to Earth. Mission Control cheered again. But as the rover placed the sample inside its storage system, something unexpected happened. A strange wind blew across Jezero Crater. Stronger than usual, dust lifted into the air. Small whirlwinds danced across the horizon, dust devils twisting and spinning like tiny red tornadoes. But one dust devil didn't behave like the others. It moved in a straight line, fast, very fast, faster than any dust devil normally moved. Perseverance turned its camera toward it. The dust devil grew taller, wider, its base darkened. The top twisted strangely, as if something were shaping it from inside. Mission Control watched in confusion. This was not normal. Something about its speed and shape didn't match known weather patterns. The narrator lowers his voice. Mars was about to reveal something no one expected. Perseverance zoomed in. And then, the dust devil suddenly changed direction and began moving straight toward the rover. The strange dust devil raced across the flat land of Jezero Crater, moving faster than any natural wind pattern scientists had ever recorded on Mars. Dust devils were common on the red planet, but this one behaved differently. It moved with purpose. It changed direction sharply. It grew taller and thinner like a spinning tower made of rust-colored smoke. Inside Mission Control, scientists stared at their screens in disbelief. The rover's camera feed showed the swirling air rising like a thin ghost above the horizon, dancing across the landscape. It twisted and bent in ways that did not match simple weather. Something about it felt controlled. Perseverance stood still, silently watching. Its sensors measured wind speed, pressure, and the direction of dust flow. Alarms in the rover's computer flashed yellow. The signals warned of unstable atmospheric motion, but Perseverance's systems held steady as the dust devil came closer. Then something unexpected happened. As the dust devil reached a large boulder, it suddenly split into two smaller spirals, each spinning in opposite directions. One spiral moved away, but the other continued toward the rover faster than before. It zipped across the rocky land, throwing sand and small stones into the air. The narrator explains that Mars has a thin atmosphere, so dust devils behave differently from Earth tornadoes, but they do not split this easily. They do not accelerate so sharply, and they do not seem to change direction with such intention. Perseverance zoomed in again. The cameras saw something inside the spinning air, a glimmer of white dust forming patterns that looked almost geometric. Mission Control leaned forward. Engineers whispered. Scientists took screenshots. Could it be a trick of the light, a sensor glitch, an illusion caused by strange shadows? The spinning column slowed, then stopped. The dust dropped to the ground as if someone had suddenly turned off a switch. Within seconds, the dust devil vanished completely. The landscape returned to silence. No wind, no movement, only the empty quietness of Mars. Perseverance scanned the area. There was nothing left. No footprints, no strange rocks, no clue, just the same ancient desert stretching into the distance. The narrator reminds the audience, Mars loves mysteries. Some are scientific, some are illusion, some remain unexplained. With the dust devil gone, the rover returned to its work. Scientists decided not to jump to conclusions. They classified the event as anomalous weather activity, the safest scientific label possible. But privately, many wondered if they had witnessed something important, something Mars wanted to hide. Still, the mission had to move forward. The rover moves deeper into Jezero Crater. Perseverance began its long journey across the crater floor. Day after day, it explored ancient river channels, dry lakebeds, and rocky ridges shaped by water long ago. Every new area brought new discoveries. The narrator explains how each rock Perseverance studied had a story. Some rocks came from violent volcanic eruptions. Some formed beneath calm water. Some carried minerals that only appear in stable lakes, the kind where microbial life might have once lived. One day, the rover found a rock that looked unusual. It had thin white lines cutting through it, almost like delicate scratches made by nature's gentle hand. But these lines were chemical fingerprints, evidence that minerals formed slowly over time. On Earth, similar rocks preserve traces of ancient life. Perseverance drilled into the rock and collected another sample. The sample tube sealed tightly, ready to be stored for a future mission that would bring the samples back to Earth. These samples could answer the oldest question of all: did life ever exist on Mars? The rover continued deeper into a region scientists called the Delta. Here, billions of years ago, a river flowed into a lake, dropping layers of sediment that built up over ages. This place could hold the strongest evidence of past life. While Perseverance explored the rocks, the tiny helicopter Ingenuity prepared for its first flight. Ingenuity's first historic flight, the day finally came when the rover dropped Ingenuity onto the Martian ground. It unfolded its thin metallic legs. Dust settled around it. The helicopter looked fragile but ready. Perseverance backed away to a safe distance. The narrator describes how the cold Martian morning arrived slowly. The temperature rose just enough. The sunlight reached the helicopter's solar panel, and then Ingenuity's blades began to spin. Slow at first, faster, then faster still. The speed increased until the blades cut through the thin Martian air like knives of shadow. Suddenly, Ingenuity lifted off. It rose 1 meter, then 2, then 3. It hovered gently, perfectly balanced against the thin air. It stayed aloft for 40 seconds. Then it touched down softly. For the first time in history, a machine built by humans had flown on another planet. Mission Control erupted in celebration. Perseverance recorded the entire flight. Scientists cheered. Engineers clapped each other on the back. The narrator reveals how emotional the moment was. Tiny, delicate Ingenuity had proved something big. Flight on Mars was possible. With this success, Ingenuity began a series of flights. It scouted ahead, mapping new paths for Perseverance. It discovered cliffs, small valleys, and areas that the rover could explore in the future. Every flight brought the mission closer to understanding Mars. The future of the mission. Months passed. Perseverance collected more samples, studied more rocks, and traveled farther across the crater. It found evidence of long-lost lakes, running rivers, and minerals that form only in watery environments. Everything pointed to one incredible idea: Mars was once alive with water and maybe with life. As the rover moved toward an ancient delta wall, the ground grew more complex. Large boulders, cracks, and slopes made travel difficult, but Perseverance moved carefully, step by step, wheel by wheel. Then something new happened. Perseverance detected a strange chemical reading in the air, a faint trace, something that did not match the normal Martian atmosphere, something organic, something that made scientists widen their eyes. The narrator states that organic molecules do not always mean life. Sometimes they come from simple chemical reactions, but sometimes they do not. Perseverance turned its sensors toward a small cave-like opening in the side of the delta wall. The chemicals seemed to come from inside it. A deep shadow rested in the cave's entrance. Dark, silent, cold, Perseverance approached slowly. The temperature sensors dipped. The light dimmed. The chemical signature grew stronger. Mission Control whispered to each other. Was it a new mineral, a rare gas, a trace of ancient biology locked in the rocks, or something completely unknown? The rover's camera adjusted its focus. The cave's darkness seemed to swallow the light. Perseverance moved closer. The chemical reading spiked higher. The narrator's voice deepens. What the rover was about to find inside that shadow could change everything humans believed about Mars. Perseverance reached the entrance. Its robotic arm lifted. Its lights switched on. And then, in the darkness, something faintly reflected the rover's light. Something that did not look like rock.